scientist. Yeah, I am a scientist. Yeah, I am a scientist. We gotta live on science alone.
Welcome to Unbiased Science, where we bring scientific method to the madness. I'm your host and public health scientist, Dr. Jess Dyer. And today I'm joined by someone I'm sure you're already familiar with. You had better be following him on social media. And if you're not, I'm sure you will after this episode. Dr. Idz Mughal, you know him as Dr. Idz. He's a medical doctor in the UK with a master's degree in nutritional research and is board certified in lifestyle medicine. Dr. Idz gives educational workshops and lectures to various schools, universities, hospitals, and health institutes across the UK, as well as he's working on several research publications in the medical and nutrition fields. Since January 2021, he's posted videos on his TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook accounts. You can follow along at that's Dr_Idz, IDZ, to help his followers combat some of the most damaging and unscientific lifestyle advice available online. And super exciting news is that he just dropped a book. It is amazing. I got to preview it. I'm not done with it yet, but it's called Saturated Facts. Such a smart title. I love it. And it debunks and corrects many of the most prevalent diet myths circulating online, popular fad diets, diet and inflammation, the gut microbiome, weight loss myths, and more. And it is available for pre-order now. Time for school, as you say, Dr. Idz. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and obviously a fan of the page, a fan of the podcast. So yeah, thank you so much for arranging this.
Yeah, and maybe Idz, we can be transparent and share that for the last 30 minutes, we've been dealing with some really bad technical issues. Hot mess, disaster. We're praying that this is recording properly. So apologies if there are any issues with quality at any point. We're trying to work through it. So Idz, and can I call you Idz? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm thinking maybe we can walk through some of the many myths that you tackle in your book. There are so many. And when I was looking through the book, it was like, oh my God, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. But just trying to pull out some of the things that I think we get asked about the most. So first and foremost, you're based in the UK. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Are you in London? Where are you?
I'm in the West Midlands area, so in and around Birmingham, the second city of England.
Amazing. Obsessed with your accent. So, all right. So you talk about this a little bit in your book, and I don't know if you know, but I'm a health policy nerd. That's what I love. And I'm very fascinated by the differences in healthcare systems in the US and in other countries. So you talk a little bit about the approach to preventative medicine in the US versus the UK. Can you just maybe talk about some of the notable differences between the two?
Yes, interesting one. So from what I understand, obviously the US system structure is primarily, like insurance-based with a mix of private insurance companies and, government programs like Medicare or like Medicaid, right? And access to preventative services can depend on all of these different factors. So person's insurance coverage, which varies widely. Now, and also in between states, obviously individual states will have their own policies who can have access to certain things. Now, the UK, the UK's National Health Service is a publicly funded healthcare system that provides, all kinds of things, your annual checkup, for example, like any preventative measures, like all these eat well strategies, public health campaigns. They're all free to all residents at the point of use. But there are obviously other, things to take into consideration. So the UK places strong emphasis on addressing, like social determinants of health, as part of its preventative strategy. So, looking at things like housing, employment, education, for example. So it does seem that the UK offers more widespread and standardized system of preventative healthcare compared to the UK. But then the funding can also be a problem because it's a, single payer model through, NHS contracts. And whereas the US has obviously like multi-layered systems where, obviously individual states will have initiatives and funding, and then you'll have the actual end consumer, and then you'll have governmental across the whole country, right? So like there are obviously some differences. I'm not too familiar with how the US operates. I just hear a lot of smack about it online, and the vast majority of my audience are US based. So it is interesting to hear some of the differences. But I will say that the UK is slowly adopting a greater interest in the preventative sphere, and that's, through initiatives and organizations like the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which I became board certified with a couple of years ago. That's new. Like that's new for the UK. That's only been a thing for 5, 6, 7 years. But and there's also now tertiary centers in primary care where extremely overweight individuals or people suffering with chronic disease, they can come in for a monthly checkup, and they can have an hour consultation with a family medicine doctor, a dietitian, even a clinical pharmacist to have like reviews and such. So we are seeing a slow shift in how we do like preventative healthcare here. But I do hope that it extrapolates, and I want the book, and I want my page, and I want the lectures that I give to be kind of amplifying and extrapolating that message.
That is so awesome. So let me ask you, obviously your book relates quite a bit to nutrition and diet. Is nutritional guidance, is that sort of built in? Like if you're to see a doctor in the UK right now, is that sort of nutritional counseling? Is that typically offered when people go to seek out primary care, or not so much?
Yeah, really, really interesting and complicated question. So there's several facets to this answer. One is, are medical doctors actually trained, first of all? So what I'll say about that is you have multiple different styles of universities that offer medical courses in the UK. You have the classical style, like at Oxford, Cambridge, Leicester, where you don't see a single patient for 3 or 4 years. You're learning in-depth lectures, biochemistry, pharmacology, anatomy, physiology, right? Clinical reasoning. You learn all of these things before you even get to grips with patients and how to interact with patients. That's called a preclinical and clinical style of medical course, right? My medical school, the University of East Anglia, is very progressive, very, very integrated. Our first entire module, our first entire semester was literally called a holistic part of health, or the holistic guide to healthy living, right? That was the first semester ever in medical school, where we covered the basics of nutritional biochemistry, what a healthy diet is, what healthy exercise is, stress, all these old wives' tales about, when you stand outside in the cold for too long, you're going to come down with a flu or a cold, right? So we debunked and we covered many of these myths and kind of a integrative, all-encompassing aspect to health before we go into the hardcore, medicine, biochemistry. So I will say that the training does differ depending on the style of institution that you go to. But what I will say, every medical doctor in the UK does have some level of nutritional training, but the individual is unlikely to prioritize that nutritional training because the vast majority of the exams are based on medical care, investigations, management. So when you're reading it in your own time and when you're going over the lectures, no one's going to spend too much time on the nutrition side because it's a tiny part of medicine. It's a really, really medicine is huge, right? So that's issue number one, is that it's obviously not a priority when it comes to all of medicine. Medicine is huge. And I'm sorry to let people know, but nutrition is only one small facet of total medical care. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, even if you have the proper education and training, to adequately advise a patient based on their medical history, we physically don't have the time. A family medicine doctor literally has to get a patient in the door and out the door within 10 minutes. That includes reading up on the previous history. That includes reviewing all their medication, doing a clinical examination, listening to the patient, which itself should need 10 minutes anyway, right? So imagine when you book in one concern with your doctor, because you haven't seen your doctor for 6 months, the general person would like to bring up issues 2, 3, and 4, right?
Yep.
So it's never just one problem. There's a multitude of problems. You have to also provide a management plan. You have to write your notes, and you have to send them out the door with whatever treatment they're getting within 10 minutes. I don't think people understand. Even if you put me, someone who spent an entire master's degree and clinical research and board certification doing nutrition, even if you put me in a GP room, a family medicine room, I would not be able to offer any important insights into someone's individual nutritional plan, even though I have the education. So that's number 2. The actual system is not set up so doctors can offer anything meaningful anyway. Number 3, not everyone has access to dietitians, right? It's not as widely accessible as we think it is. Now, so there's a problem at every level of infrastructure. One, at the education side, of course, not every medical doctor. Many of my friends come to me to ask me for advice, and they are doctors as well, right? So that's number 1. The training obviously differs between institutions. 2, the actual healthcare system is not set up in place where you can offer anything tailored, even if you do have the education. And 3, the actual patient will often, bring up lots of different problems. Whereas if obviously this is no fault of the actual patient, it's because it's so difficult post-COVID now to get an appointment regardless of who you are, regardless of how often you come in. So there's just too many barriers to actually get access to sound nutritional intervention that's targeted towards you, right? The individual. So we need to have a multi-layered approach where we increase access to dietitians, we make things more accessible, we increase the time per patient, and we increase the training across the board.
So I'm smirking right now because Americans, you see, it's not just the US that has these problems. I mean, it's a lot of what you're describing we're dealing with here. And obviously the system is set up differently. But here, physicians tend to be reimbursed based on number of patients seen, something called RVUs. And then there's also you get the most money for procedures. So you're not getting compensated for those types of, the counseling, the very important conversations that patients need to have with their clinicians. So lots of problems. And then the other thing that you mentioned that really, I'm sure people are nodding along as you were saying it is nearly impossible to get an appointment now. And so what's happening here is, I need an appointment today. You're telling me I can't get in to see my doctor for 6 months. First of all, how does that help me now? And this means that people are then pushed to urgent cares or emergency rooms where there's more costly care. And these are not PCPs who are familiar with your medical background. So they have to do a lot of tests to understand what's going on. It's a disaster. So, all right, good to hear that we're not the only ones with problems. All right. It's one more question about, and I'm curious, we didn't chat about this previously, but another difference that strikes me, people are often coming down on the US for, the quality of food here is worse than in other countries. Our nutrition is worse. And they point to that, things are banned in other countries that aren't banned here in the US. And I often call people's attention to the different approaches to assessing safety. And it's hazard-based approach versus risk-based approach. And my understanding is that in the UK and in other countries, you're assessing whether something has the potential to harm. It's a hazard-based approach versus a risk-based approach, which we take in the US, which takes into account likelihood of exposure. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just curious, because I'm sure people will have that question as they're listening.
Yeah, very interesting. This is this is something that I strategically do in my videos when I'm talking about a particular ingredient that's made a headline, right? You'll always see that I always refer to the European Food Safety Authority assessment, right? And I do that because the average American can't then come back and say that, oh no, they're keeping it in our food because they want us to be sick, right? Well, you can't use that argument when many countries in Europe have a socialized healthcare like the UK. And if it's safe for the European Food Safety Authority and it's also safe for the US, you should have no problems, right? That now the funny thing is that despite these differences in, the types of approaches used to ban or put cautionary preventative measures on certain ingredients, the funny thing is the US has actually banned many more food dyes in particular and additives and colors than Europe or the UK. So
Preach, Idz.
it's not even close. But when I bring that up, there's always some different conspiracy, even though I've just addressed I've addressed the direct point, right? You always see videos like 4 foods that are banned in Europe that are allowed in the US. I could make a video showing 25 foods that are banned in the US or ingredients that are allowed in Europe, right? Where's the outrage? Where's the cry? Europe is poisoning us, right?
You'll never hear that. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Americans are so critical of our food regulations. And I think a great example of how the media really plays a big role in this, right? They'll take things, we've talked about this ad nauseum. It's all about clickbait, what's going to get attention. So take aspartame, right? Artificial sweeteners and the, everything that came out, all the fear about, oh, it's causing cancer. Well, first of all, this one agency, they said that it was possibly carcinogenic and put it in the same category as aloe vera and pickled vegetables. It's completely taken out of context. And again, we're talking about hazard, not risk, because the amount that you would need to consume is something, it's so unrealistic. We would never meet that threshold for risk, right? And it's based on preclinical rat studies where these rats are exposed to levels of aspartame that are orders of magnitude higher than anything we would ever realistically be exposed to. So these are all important factors that people don't necessarily keep in mind as they're consuming these very scary headlines. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And the other thing I'll say is, even though the WHO, as part of their IARC classification, did group it as a possible carcinogen, the other arm of the WHO, JECFA, which is the Joint Experts Committee on Food Additives, which is the designated committee for additives specifically, not just all things in our exposure, they used the whole risk-based assessment and they actually accounted for dosage, and it found something like, I think they reestablished the safe limit. I think it was 40 milligrams per kilogram, which equals around 12 to 14 cans of diet drink a day, every single day for years on end before any possible issue. And don't even get me started on the ADI, the acceptable daily intake, which has already a factor of 100 already included in the ADI. So people just need to really, really become a bit more critical of headlines, of people walking around supermarkets just shouting at packets of food, right? Actually look at the data, look at the governmental agencies from not just from one country, all around the world. When there's a scientific consensus from multiple different health institutes around the world, there's no global conspiracy. They're all individual countries. It's in no it's in no one's interest in the UK to have more sick people. No one.
Right.
It's only it's costing the taxpayer. I don't get paid anymore. I can prescribe 1,000 pills. I won't get paid a single penny more. Right? It just increases my workload. I would love to get paid for seeing no patients, right, in a day. My pay would be exactly the same. Right? So I do not have any interest in treating any more patients. The government doesn't have any more interest. Just stop believing everything is a big conspiracy, please.
Right. And I love people give the government a lot of credit to think that we could orchestrate this collusion, right? It's just this would not happen.
Yeah.
All right. So it's in your book, you tackle
Yeah.
so many myths. Are there, I know this is probably very difficult, but are there like 2 or 3 that really jump out at you that particularly irk you that maybe we can chat about?
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on for a good, I would say 3-4 years now. These few myths have just really irked me. They've really taken social media by storm. And the first one is obvious to everyone, you know, the whole claim that seed oils are toxic, they cause inflammation. You know, I don't really want to go into a half an hour, you know, discussion as to why it's complete nonsense. But what I will say is people's logic falls on its face in several places. So you have what I call like the complete charlatans who have no scientific understanding at the superficial level. So they're the ones that claim anything artificial is bad, you know, natural is better. You should see how seed oils are produced. That's those kind of superficial arguments. They can easily be dismantled simply because of the appeal to nature fallacy, of course. Like, just because something is natural doesn't mean it's better. They're very simple examples, you know, arsenic, heavy metals, parasites are natural. Are you going to consume parasites? Mold on food is natural. Do you want to eat moldy food? No, of course not, right? Are you going to have an abundance of heavy metals found in rock formations in the earth? No, obviously you're not. So the appeal to nature fallacy is a very quick one to dismantle. Now, the people who I would call pseudo-scientists, who have some kind of scientific background, they have the ability to search something on PubMed, albeit not very well, right? So these are the kind of the next layer of pseudo-intellectuals who bring different arguments. So they say things like, you know, seed oils are rich in a fatty acid called linoleic acid, and linoleic acid, you know, basically gets converted into something called arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid is a precursor and mediator to several inflammatory pathways, which can increase levels of systemic inflammation, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the arguments. Let's just quickly debunk that one. So actually, lots of clinical trials show, which I've referenced in a recent video I posted to my Instagram and my TikTok, actually, was a deep dive in the seed oil inflammation myth. Increasing dietary intake of linoleic acid by 500% or decreasing it by 90% has no effect on arachidonic acid levels in the blood, tissue, serum, anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're not increasing the levels of arachidonic acid by consuming linoleic acid, then your argument's fallen straight away. Now, let's give them benefit of the doubt and let's just assume that some levels of linoleic acid do get converted, okay? Even if that was the case, the amount that is actually converted is very, very minuscule because the process is highly inefficient, and arachidonic acid acts as both a pro and anti-inflammatory mediator. It's not just a pro-inflammatory mediator, right? Anyone who studied medicine will tell you this because arachidonic acid is implicated in many medication, in the pharmaceutical pathways of lots of different things, right? So that hypothesis falls on its face straight away. Now, the next layer is people claim that when you cook with them or when you heat them, you can form, it oxidizes, it forms trans and saturated fats, which we know is obviously harmful to cardiovascular health and levels of systemic inflammation. That's fine. However, no medical professional would ever advise you to consume copious amounts of deep fried food. No one would say that. No one would do that. So if we're not talking about fried food, we're talking about household, day-to-day, pan cooking, roasting, baking, right? Actually, the research shows that you do transform seed oils into trans fats a little bit when you heat it up to around 200, 220 degrees, and you leave it there for 2 hours and you reheat it, right? When you're cooking an egg in the morning, You're not
Mhm.
reaching the temperature, you're not reaching the duration, you're not reaching any of the criteria needed to have a large amount of transformation of the actual fats. Okay.
Right.
Now, the most important thing, when you actually look at the human controlled evidence on seed oils, even those that are commercially available in the stores, right? They're not cold press, extra virgin olive oil or whatever. These are normal store-bought seed oils, okay? Even when you look at them, it shows that there was a review in 2016 that reviewed 37 randomized controlled trials. 10 of them were on the impact of seed oils in humans and their effects on systemic inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, interleukin-3, tumor necrosis factor alpha. They showed that none of the 10 controlled human trials had any negative effects on inflammation, and 3 of them showed an anti-inflammatory effect, right? So not only is it not inflammatory, in certain situations, especially when you're comparing it to saturated fats, which a lot of these anti-seed oil crowd hang their hat on, that,
Yep.
tallow, butter, ghee,
Yes.
animal fats,
Mhm.
they're apparently healthier for you. It actually has an anti-inflammatory effect, especially when compared to those types of fats. So the evidence at every single level of science is just completely, it's irrefutable. The superficial level at the appeal to nature, the level at the linoleic acid level, and also remember that seed oils do not contain 100% linoleic acid. They're
Mhm.
actually mostly monounsaturated fats. So if you're going to claim a food is harmful to your health, you can't isolate a single component. You have to
Right.
look at the total ingredient. What is the food actually made up of, right? Based on that logic, I could say apples are poison. They would kill you because they contain cyanide,
Mhm.
right? But obviously not.
Right. I am obsessed. By the way, I love that you're like, I'm not going to do a deep dive. I'm just going to chat about this briefly. And then you're like, bam, you go in with the details. I love it. I love it. No, I love how passionate you are. And I mean, so much of what's pushed out on Unbiased Science is we're saying a lot of the same things. And it's so difficult. I'm sure you feel the same frustration. Like, I understand. I'm a mom. Like, I actually just recorded a reel about this. I would do anything to protect my kids. So I understand that seeing a headline that says this is causing cancer, this is you're sort of like your mama bear, sense gets activated, and it's like it's going to get your attention. But obviously, as we've been discussing this whole time, they're not based in science. They're exaggerations at best, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Potentially, sometimes there are seeds of truth, but they're totally distorted and taken out of context, and they don't give the important details like, okay, at what level, what's the required exposure, all those things. So how do we, and this is sort of like an existential question. It's like, how do we take back, I don't know, not common sense. I don't know. How do we combat this? It's so overwhelming. We know that misinformation travels 6 times faster than credible information. The amount of time, I mean, I know you and I, like, how many hours a day are we dedicating to trying to undo the damage of these people who are either, knowingly or sometimes unknowingly spreading this mis and disinformation? It's just, aren't you sometimes just overwhelmed? I sometimes feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, people don't realize, like, I get tagged in anywhere from 200 to 400 videos every single day.
Yep.
And the vast majority of them, I would probably say 90 to 95% are utter garbage, like
Yep.
utter fear-mongering, sensationalized, clickbaity, just not actually interested in educating, but more interested in scaring, right? That's the
Yes.
first thing I'd say. And some quite easy and useful to implement strategies that I would recommend for, the average listener that's just really fed up with all of the contradictory kind of waffle they're hearing online, is, first of all, just be skeptical about what you hear, regardless of who it's from, right? Try not to take things at face value before you implement it into your actual life, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Don't be afraid to ask for evidence. And I love it when people start to develop what I call their bullshit radar, right? If you can develop a bullshit radar, you will save yourself from 95% of garbage out there. And these are a few things that you can do to start building your bullshit radar, right? So look out for absolutist statements, number one. So anyone that makes any kind of claim such as these are the 5 worst foods for your gut, all right? These are the top 5 most inflammatory foods for your health, right? You know, the words like most and best and worst and, you know, all these kinds of words, it really highlights someone's level of ignorance and lack of understanding and nuance of a topic, because there is no situation where you will take 5 foods and they will be equally as beneficial or equally as harmful for any 2 different individuals, right?
Yes.
So there's, for example, if you take me and take someone else that has, you know, inflammatory bowel disease, for example, yeah? An apple for me is absolutely not going to increase levels of systemic inflammation. It's not going to, right? But if they're just after a relapse, or if they've got an acute flare-up and they consume an apple, right, you can guarantee it's going to cause them massive distress, you know, potentially increases in systemic inflammatory markers. You might get localized inflammatory signs when looking at scans or taking a biopsy, right? And this is just one individual with one medical condition. And I've literally pointed out that even something as harmless as an apple can be inflammatory for one person and anti-inflammatory or neutral for someone else, right?
Right.
The fact that people even think it's wise to make videos like, here are the top worst foods for you. What do you mean for you? Who are you speaking to? You're not speaking to the same person. You're speaking to hundreds of thousands of individuals, right?
Right.
So
right.
if you see absolutist statements, you can almost guarantee 99% of the time that whatever's going to follow is not going to be completely evidence-based. Number 2, do they allude to studies show or science says without actually citing said evidence? If they do cite evidence, then are they defensive when they interact with other people, right? That's a massive giveaway. Any credible scientist, anyone who's actually interested in the truth, will be open to criticism, can correct themselves, will be open to learning new information. But what you tend to find with a lot of these pages is, because their page and their audience has built and developed of it because of a specific narrative, they are often far too deep into their narrative to ever consider changing their views, right? That's a very, very, very dangerous sort of character, a very dangerous sort of page, because they know that it's going to harm their credibility. It might even harm their pockets because of financial interests, right? If they all of a sudden realize that a carnivore diet might not be the best way to live, oh no, what do I do now? I've got 1 million followers. Oh crap, right? So you have to understand that. Do they allude to science shows, and are they defensive? Number 2. Number three, and I would arguably say is one of the biggest telltale signs, you know, do they blame a single ingredient or food for the rise in incidence of any disease, any single disease, right? Whether it's heart disease, diabetes, obesity. If these individuals actually understood how complicated any one of these diseases are, no credible scientist would ever say it's due because of one single food, one single ingredient. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you I just want people to look at the complexity of obesity, for example, right? You've got psychological factors, you've got social environmental, you've got geographical aspects, you've got, you know, environmental exposures, you've got genetic things such as, you know, a very simple one to point out is a mutation in the FTO gene, which can influence appetite regulation, for example. So a meal might not be as satiating for me as it would be for someone else, for example. You've got things like, you know, pre-existing medical conditions. You've got things like accessibility to food, financial situation, circumstances, right? you've got so many aspects involved in just one disease. So when people make a video like, oh no, the rise in heart disease or obesity might be because of seed oils, it's like, what are you
What?
talking about?
And the audacity to point to a singular cause. I mean, yeah, I'm a data scientist. And so just the phrase I always use is multifactorial, right? All of these diseases are multifactorial. And I think about, okay, when we're assessing, let's say when we're doing statistical analysis, we're putting together models, you know, regression models or whatever they might be, that have so many different variables that we know are impacting the outcome. And more than that, they're also, as you said, interacting with each other, genetic factors, environmental factors. There are so many layers to this thing. So I agree, this oversimplification of health is deeply disturbing to those of us who actually understand how things work, right?
Yeah. And that, you know, these are some very easy to spot red flags when you're surfing kind of social media content. And I will say, like, just try and cultivate your feeds by, you know, clicking not interested in people in supermarkets, right? Clicking unfollowing people who make food lists, top 5 foods, worst 5 foods, whatever.
Yep.
And just try to surround yourself with sensible, you know, rational, credentialed professionals. And also there are some non-credentialed who put out very, very good information. Let's not do the appeal to authority, you know, fallacy right now. Like, just generally be aware that the more kind of balanced a video or argument is, generally the more sensible and rational it is. So even if I'm describing the health impacts of a particular food, let's say, you know, processed meat and the risk of colorectal cancer, right? Even though that is well established, I will always make it clear of the actual relative risk increase. I will always make it clear of the actual dosage that is in question, right? Because it lets people know that actually, oh, okay, so if I'm under this, I might not have any significant increases, right? And I will always let people know that the totality of the dietary pattern and your lifestyle factors will be more important than any single shift. Okay.
Yes.
Even though I'm trying to warn people about potential health risks, it's the fact that there's balance to the argument that makes it sensible. Yeah.
Yes. And sorry, go on. Finish your thought.
No, I was saying, so you have to look for content like that, which gives you all of the context. Well, not all of the context, but gives you a lot of the context, a lot of the nuance, and doesn't try to scare you into doing a certain thing.
Totally. And you know, I get asked a lot, well, then why would people do this? Why are they putting it out? Two things, money and attention. I mean, if you grow a very large social media following, that can be monetized, right? I mean, I haven't cracked that code, but I'm saying like people do. And also you get a lot of attention. Like you said, those all or none statements, those are sexy. I mean, I always say the reality is a lot less sexy. It's so much more nuanced. You know, people don't want to hear, well, actually it's multifactorial and it depends on a combination. But instead, if they're being told this is good, this is bad, that's easy to understand, right? It empowers people to feel like they have control over their health, when the reality is there are very few things that if we consume them in moderation are going to cause cancer or, you know, like really greatly impact our health. So, all right, there are so many things I want to talk about, and there's no way we're getting through everything that I wanted to talk about. But two things. One, I do want to talk about processed foods, and I will say that on our page, you know, there's been content that says that processed foods are not inherently bad. And a lot of this is because, you know, there's no standard definition of processed. And now we're sort of distinguishing between this concept of processed and ultra processed. And we say that all foods, like when you buy at the supermarket, they're processed to some degree, right? So even like canning or freezing, like that's considered processed. But I do want to make clear, and I'd love to talk about this with you, that this isn't an endorsement of eating a lot of processed foods. For me, it's more like, you don't have to shame yourself or freak out if every now and then you're having processed or ultra processed foods. It's more about the proportion, right? You don't want the large majority of your diet to be comprised of ultra processed foods because, you know, there are a lot of empty calories and they tend to have higher levels of sugar or whatever, all these other things. What do you have to say about this topic?
Yeah, interesting. So what I will say first and foremost is, if we're looking at the ultra processed category, which what most people would consider to be processed, right? Like that's actually the category that they're actually trying to demonize. You know,
Right.
let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. They mean ultra processed, right? Um, the main issue with, you know, having a large proportion of ultra processed food in your diet is not really to do with the individual components within those foods. It's more to do with the hyperpalatability of those foods, right? The fact that they don't stimulate satiety as well as lots of minimally processed foods, of course, because the way I like to describe it to people that aren't really familiar is when you ultra process something, what you're doing is you're kind of, you know, you'll be churning it, you'll be grinding it, you'll be powdering it, you'll be putting it into a condensed food form like a bar or a product or a chocolate or a sweet, right? Now, because your manufacturing process of that almost acts like digestion. So you've done a lot of the work that your body would need to do if you were consuming the original form of that food to begin with. Yeah. Now, there are many downsides to that because we know that when you compare an ultra processed cheese sandwich to a minimally processed cheese sandwich, the thermic effect or thermogenesis that is induced from digesting both of those foods can be reduced by almost 50%. So I think for one sandwich, you used about 130 calories to digest food. For the other sandwich, you used about 60, 65. Now, if all of your meals are ultra processed, not only will it not satiate you to a greater extent, not only will it be more tasty a lot of the time, so you're more likely to have more of it, but the actual number of calories you're using to digest, absorb, and intake those nutrients is also less. So you're affecting the calories outside of the equation and you're affecting the calories inside of the equation. And food manufacturers are very, very smart. They know the specific ratio of sugars, fats, and salt to add to a product to make it very hyperpalatable. And this is a combination of nutrients that you don't really see in nature, right? I don't want to jump on the bandwagon of, you know, the naturalistic fallacy. Yeah. But what I am saying is there is no denying that certain ultra processed foods are extremely tasty and you can eat a lot of them in extremely short period of time without getting full. Yeah. Now,
Yep.
as much as I love the sweetest of fruits, I love raspberries, pomegranate, mango, watermelon, there's actually only so much that I can eat before I feel physically sick from being so full, right? Whereas if you give me a box of Krispy Kreme donuts, right, I could eat 6 of them and I wouldn't even bat an eye. Like I would have just intaken 2,000-3,000 calories, which is my daily intake. Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
I will have eaten 2-3 extra meals on top of that. Yeah. So the main problem with ultra processing is not actually the individual ingredients within that food. It's the ability for it to be overconsumed in a short period of time, which is a large, I wouldn't say a large reason. It's one of the reasons why overweight and obesity is on the rise because of the obesogenic environment. So not only is it an advancement in technology where we don't have to move around as much, right? Nowhere in human history have we ever been able to press a button and 10 minutes later, you've got a boiling hot katsu curry on your doorstep, right? That has never been the case throughout history. So not only do you not have to leave your sofa, you don't have to walk anywhere, you don't have to go to a phone booth to call anyone, you don't have to even leave your house to get food to your house. Yeah. If you combine that with added stress from the working environment, with an aging population, so there's greater demands, the cost of living crisis, right? You've got tax issues, you've got, you know, stress, poor sleep, insomnia, mental health issues are at an all-time high. So, and we know now from controlled trials from even as early as 2008 and even before, where you subject individuals to only 4 hours of sleep per night compared to 7 hours, they spontaneously eat 550 calories extra the next day. And this is an ad libitum trial, meaning they weren't told to, they just were given the instruction of eat until you're satisfied. This was one night's deprivation and they ate 500 more calories, right?
Wow.
Imagine what years of sleep deprivation does to you. Okay.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that's
Yeah,
only
sorry.
that's only one mechanism. If you combine sleep deprivation with stress, with the obesogenic environment, with the lack of needing to move anywhere, with the cost of living crisis, with the lack of accessible and affordable food and healthy foods, with also genetic factors and survivability bias, and the fact that modern technology is so good, so we can keep babies alive when they used to die back in the day because of any kind of illness, genetic problem, celiac disease. Celiac babies 100, 150 years ago used to all just die, right?
Oh my gosh.
Look,
Yeah.
luckily now we can help them thrive. We have different formulas, we have different lactose-free things, and we have different allergy-free foods, right? So all of these factors together make it very, very easy for someone to not actively try and get very, very overweight. Now, that is one of the main problems with ultra processing. There is a subcategory of argument about emulsifiers, thickeners, gelling agents, right? Artificial flavorings, whatever. That is very, very like that. That is the arguments for those actually causing harm are in a very specific subset of the population that don't affect the majority of people. In some cases, yes, certain gelling agents, certain emulsifiers, certain preservatives might cause you some gastrointestinal upset, but any of the approved ones and the regulated ones, they're not going to cause chronic disease. They're not going to cause your inflammatory bowel disease. Just understand that ultra processing is mainly a problem of poor satiety, hyperpalatability, and overconsumption. That's where the main problem lies.
Okay, you're amazing. First of all, you're also painting a very grim picture. No, but it's a realistic picture. A couple of things I want to point out. Anytime we talk about overweight and obesity, I just want to be clear, we're not, blaming people, as Idz has said. This is really multifactorial. There are a lot of factors that are not in a person's control, right? So we just want to be clear about that. And I know you acknowledge that all the time. 2 or 3, I don't even know where I'm at, is I think what you and I feel strongly about, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is you're making a lot of really great points. But it's not like you shouldn't, it's not the end of the world if you have a grilled cheese sandwich made with American cheese, which of course is highly processed, right? It's not the end of the world. We have to, I feel like we've become this society of fear mongering and shame and guilt. And it's like, you can enjoy these things every now and then. They taste good. I love, like I said, a grilled cheese sandwich. Right? I mean, would you agree? We don't need to take a very extreme all or none stance with these foods.
This was my breakfast.
Thank you. I had
It
McDonald's
was
yesterday.
it was an ultra processed spicy chicken mayo sandwich. I had some porridge on the side, and I always drink my artificially sweetened water with the toxic aspartame, toxic dyes. I'm joking. Listen, like if people don't understand that, the poison is in the dosage. Things that are more important are obviously things like getting your fruits and veg in every single day, making sure you don't overconsume or try your best not to overconsume calories in total. Enjoying a grilled cheese sandwich, enjoying a McDonald's, enjoying whatever type of ultra processed treat that you like is obviously not going to cause harm. The problem is if the majority of your diet every single day is ultra processed, then it becomes pretty difficult to manage your total intake. That's all we're saying. Buy whatever you can afford, right? Don't be scared of frozen fruits, vegetables, meats, even fish, right? They're generally, they last longer, they're cheaper generally, right? Don't be afraid of canned foods, canned beans, lentils, pulses, right? Fruits, veggies, don't be scared of those either. And try to look in the reduced section of your supermarket. Typically, you'll find salad bags, fruit pots, right? Dairy, like low-fat dairy products. You'll find some good stuff there as well. So even if your financial situation is difficult, you can try your best to look for some things that would still be classified as nutrient rich, that would be healthful, even if they are canned in a packet or frozen. Don't be concerned.
I'm so glad that you, excuse me, I'm so glad that you said that, because there is so much shaming that goes along with this. And unfortunately, we know that when we make the, when people make these claims that, for example, organic is better than conventional, or that frozen or canned is bad for us, the people who are affected most are those of lower socioeconomic status, and they will actually forego eating fruits and veggies because of this fear of the conventional or of canned or frozen. That's terrible, because as you said, we just need to focus on getting more fruits and veggies and produce into our diets, right? That bottom line, that's it. It doesn't, we just this obsession with organic or non-GMO or all those things. I think it's we see it's having a real effect on consumption patterns, and it's unfortunately disproportionately affecting those in lower socioeconomic statuses. So I'm really glad you made that distinction. So, Idz, I know we're coming up on time here. Any last thoughts that you want to share with folks? Anything, any key takeaways you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think I'll just finish by saying, even though we've talked about, lots of barriers and lots of hurdles that people face on a day-to-day basis, struggling with financials and all this, demonization of perfectly safe and affordable shelf-stable foods. I will just say, just don't feel so disheartened by it, because the overall message is that, you eat to the best of your ability, right? You get the things that you have access to that are close in your vicinity, and you don't worry about the minutiae of individual ingredients or components. Just make sure you're following the general healthful dietary principles, which include a majority minimally processed diet, right? Lots of plant vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Fatty fish is also very, very, very good for you. Dairy products, and obviously go easy on the processed meats, go easy on the saturated fats. You will be perfectly fine. Now, just try your best to cultivate your social media followings or your social media For You pages or algorithms, so you're not constantly bombarded, people calling you a terrible mother, a terrible father, you're not a good parent, right? Like, I literally just today I saw a video that, funny thing is, she preemptively blocked me. So when I saw the tag, I had to use my alternate account because I saw that she blocked me, right? These people know, they know I'm coming for them. They know I am coming for them, right? But funny, like I literally just saw today, and she was like, I'm a crunchy mom. Of course, I won't buy anything not organic. I'm a crunchy mom. Of course, I'll never feed my children dye-laden and artificially sweetened garbage junk. And it's like, imagine what that's doing to the psyche of the individual parent, right? Who often, children are very picky eaters. Like, we can't just feed them some vegetables and they'll eat it whenever you want. It's just not, a fed child is better than a dead child. So feed the child whatever they can eat, and try to include or add healthy foods as you go along in their development, right? Now, don't get sucked into this demonization, the kind of, this whole part of making you feel guilty and trying to buy into their narrative. Just understand that we're talking about majority or totality of diet, totality of lifestyle choices. The rest should be okay. And obviously, if you have any individualized medical queries or problems, then obviously don't go to social media for your advice. Go to your primary care physician, go to your dietitian, go to your public health practitioner.
Oh, my goodness. Amazing, Idz. And you're right. I mean, I feel like we're cultivating this generation that's riddled with health anxiety, food anxiety, potentially disordered eating, so much guilt and shame. So you make so many important points. Everyone listening right now, we are going to link to Dr. Idz's book,
Yes.
Saturated Facts. Oh my goodness. It is so incredible. Idz, you break it down in a way that is so fun, engaging, but also informative and accessible. Highly, highly recommend this book. Please go out and pre-order it now. Honestly, I feel like it should be recommended reading for everyone. And also be sure to follow Idz on all the TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, or no?
Facebook,
TikTok.
Facebook.
Oh, Facebook. Okay. And again, we'll link to this in the show notes. But that's DR_IDZ. Trust me, you will not regret it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Idz, for joining me today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm just glad the connection held steady. I'm just
Well,
glad.
honestly, I'm terrified for those listening. I'm so sorry. So just a total side note, we usually record this on Riverside, but we're recording right now on Zoom. So I have no clue what the sound quality will be. And I'm realizing I don't think I can export the individual audio file. So if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify and it feels a little echoey, we apologize. Idz, you're in South Africa right now. My internet was spotty here in Massachusetts. So we are doing what we can to make this work. So hopefully you can hear some of this. All right. Well, we hope you found this interesting and you enjoyed today's episode. I have some great episodes planned in the coming weeks, so I hope you'll stay tuned. Excuse me. In the meantime, of course, I'll continue to share infographics and reels to Unbiased Science social media channels. So be sure to give a follow at Unbiased Sci Pod. It would also be super helpful if you would leave us a review on Apple or wherever you're tuning in. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. Remember, there's also a Substack newsletter. It's free to subscribe, but if you're willing and able, paid subscriptions are much appreciated. Sincere thanks for tuning in and following along as we share no nonsense, just science.